The call came in at exactly 3 o'clock IEM, the kind of hour where nothing good ever happens. My phone lit the room with this cold blue glow, and before I even reached for it, something in me knew it wasn't going to be good news. Tiffany's name flashed on the screen. I answered half asleep, expecting maybe an Uber issue, maybe a drunk I miss you, maybe nothing serious. But the moment I said hello, she didn't even breathe before unloading the crisis. My card declined at the club. They're not letting us leave. You need to send me $2,000 right now. The desperation in her voice wasn't soft. It was sharp, frantic, panicked, like she was reading lines from a script she'd rehearsed for this exact kind of emergency. My first thought wasn't concern. It was exhaustion. Exhaustion from months of warnings, patterns, and red flags I kept brushing aside because love makes you give people more credit than they've earned. So I told her the simplest, most logical thing: call your dad. Then I hung up, turned the phone off, and went back to sleep with a peace I hadn't felt in months. But peace never lasts long, especially when someone else's choices are a ticking bomb. The call that came from the police station the next morning hit me like ice water. An officer's calm voice, too calm for the situation, asking if I was the fiance of Tiffany Walsh. That's when everything tilted. I wish I could tell you I was shocked, but part of me had been waiting for the crash. Tiffany had been living like a runaway train headed straight for a wall, and every conversation about money, responsibility, or boundaries turned into her accusing me of being controlling or embarrassing her by not funding the lifestyle she believed she deserved. It wasn't that she was careless, it was that she believed consequences didn't apply to her. We'd been engaged for 8 months, and during that time, she'd shown me two faces. One was the version she wanted to be, a responsible, independent woman ready to build a future. The other was the version she'd learned from the group of friends who lived off their husbands' credit limits and their parents' bank accounts. Tiffany was caught between the fantasy and the real world, and instead of choosing sanity, she chose the illusion. She had this polished image, always in designer clothes, always posting pictures in restaurants her salary couldn't support, always acting like the world owed her something, simply because she'd grown up with privilege. But privilege without discipline becomes a trap, and she walked right into it. The truth is, the cracks had been forming long before Miami. Tiffany had been cut off by her parents 2 years prior, though she never gave a straight answer why. They don't support my independence, she'd say. They're controlling. But the more I saw, the more it looked like they were exhausted from trying to fix a problem she didn't want to acknowledge. She made $40,000 a year and spent like she made 100. She budgeted her life around appearances, not reality, and she expected me to fill the gap between the life she wanted and the life she could actually afford, not with conversation, not with compromise, with my wallet. That's not partnership. That's parasitism. So when she called from that Miami nightclub crying about an $8,000 0 cents tab she and her friends couldn't pay, expecting me to swoop in and save them, it wasn't just a financial emergency. It was the moment her fantasy finally collided with the truth, and she didn't know how to handle it. She wanted me to step into the role her parents used to play: the fixer, the safety net, the endless funder of her bad decision. But I'm not built for that. I work hard for my money. I don't throw it at problems someone created because they refuse to act like an adult. When I told her again to call her dad and hung up, it wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. It was the first time I'd truly protected myself. And the fact that it ended with her being arrested isn't on me. It's on the choices she made every step of the way. If someone puts themselves in danger through lies and reckless spending, do you think their partner is obligated to bail them out at 3 a.m.? Or is it fair to let the consequences finally catch up? At the time the sun came up that morning, the weight of everything she'd been hiding finally started to make sense. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone, scrolling through missed calls and texts that escalated from baby please to all caps panic, and I realized something uncomfortable but painfully clear. Tiffany had never expected consequences. Every decision she made came with a built-in assumption that someone else, her parents, her friends, or now me, would clean up the fallout. Even in her apology text, she never took responsibility. It was always the club's fault or the girl's fault or bad luck, never her choices, never her lies. The officer's call only confirmed what I already knew was coming. She's being held on charges of theft of services and disorderly conduct, he said in that flat, procedural tone cops use when they've repeated the same story to 100 people. He explained that Tiffany and her friends had racked up a massive tab and refused to pay. When the club tried to hold them accountable, Tiffany lost her composure and made everything worse. That part didn't surprise me. Whenever reality contradicted her fantasy, she lashed out like the world was personally attacking her. And each time she did, she expected me to be the buffer between her and the consequences. I asked the officer if she was okay. He told me she was physically fine, just angry, embarrassed, and insisting I'd come fix everything. She'd given them my number as the person who will handle this. Hearing that made something in my chest harden. It wasn't love, it wasn't duty. It was the realization that somewhere along the line, she'd stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as a tool, a fallback, a financial parachute she felt entitled to. And entitlement only grows when you feed it. So I told the officer the truth. I wasn't paying her bail. I wasn't flying to Miami. I wasn't fixing the mess she created. He paused for a moment, probably not used to hearing that, but I didn't waver. The more I spoke, the clearer my voice became. She needs to contact her family, I said, not me. It was the first boundary I'd drawn where I didn't bend under her tears or guilt or manipulation. And the moment I hung up, I felt this strange mixture of sadness, relief, clarity, the kind you feel when a storm finishes ripping apart something that was already rotting on the inside. What followed next was chaos. Tiffany's friends blew up my phone within minutes. Madison called first, furious, acting as if I had committed a crime. "She's your fiance," she shouted. "You're supposed to take care of her." These were the same girls who spent years mocking her for having to work like a normal adult, who pushed her into debt so she wouldn't look poor around them. But when it came time to actually help her, not one of them pulled out their Black Amex or their Snapchat influencer brand money. They wanted me to do it. The working class fiance who didn't play their game. The one they talked down to at parties because my job didn't come with a trust fund attached. Then Charlotte called, crying dramatically as if she were the one behind bars. "She supported you emotionally," she said. "You should have supported her financially," as if emotions and thousands of dollars were two sides of the same coin, as if love automatically meant signing blank checks for self-inflicted disasters. Sarah left a voicemail telling me I was abusive for not rescuing her friend. Abusive, as if setting financial boundaries was the same as controlling her. These women had twisted definitions for everything. Love means unlimited spending, support means covering their bad choices, responsibility means enabling them. They lived in a world where debt doesn't matter because someone else always pays the bill. But the most interesting moment came hours later when my phone rang again, a number I didn't recognize, a calm, steady voice on the other end. Tiffany's father speaking. Of all the people I expected to blame me, he wasn't one of them. But he didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he didn't guilt. He just asked a question: why didn't you help her? And that's when everything shifted. Because as soon as he spoke, I heard something in his tone, not anger, not disappointment, but exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who had lived this cycle far longer than I had. He knew her past, he knew her history, and he knew exactly what she'd become. By the time he finished explaining how she'd burned through an entire trust fund in 6 months, how her parents hadn't cut her off for control but for survival, how she'd racked up credit card debt she never intended to pay, it didn't feel like he was defending her. It felt like he was warning me. As if he'd watched this story unfold before, with her last boyfriend and the one before that, as if he could already see where my life would end up if I kept playing the role she assigned me, the fixer, the bank, the shield from consequences. And in that moment, everything clicked into place. The fantasy Tiffany sold herself wasn't just unrealistic, it was dangerous. And if I kept enabling it, I wouldn't just lose money, I'd lose my future. If a partner repeatedly hides debt, lies about money, and expects you to bail them out every time, do you believe ending the engagement is cruel or the only fair, self-protective choice? The truth is, Miami wasn't the beginning. It was the explosion at the end of a very long fuse that had been burning quietly for months. The deeper I think back, the more I realize there were dozens of small moments, little fractures in the foundation, that I ignored because it felt easier to keep the peace than admit the relationship was built on incompatible values. And every one of those fractures had a similar pattern: money, image, status, comparison. Tiffany treated relationships the same way her friends treated handbags: something to show off, something to measure worth, something to upgrade whenever she felt insecure. I just didn't want to see it. The cracks really started showing the night of Madison's engagement party. The moment we walked into that upscale downtown venue, chandeliers, ice sculptures, live quartet, the works, I felt Tiffany stiffen beside me. Her posture changed, her voice changed. It was like she stepped into a role, trying to perform a version of herself that blended in with the wives of wealthy finance guys and trust fund heirs. I remember watching her eyes dart from dress to dress, ring to ring, like she was silently comparing herself to every woman in the room. It wasn't curiosity, it was panic disguised as admiration. Her college friends were already there, four women who walked into every room like they owned the place. They didn't greet Tiffany with hugs or warmth. They scanned her outfit first. That was how they measured everything: appearance before personality, value before character. They complimented Madison's 3-carat ring like it was a trophy, something she'd earned rather than something her fiancé purchased to show off his wealth. Tiffany tried to play along, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, pretending she wasn't embarrassed by the borrowed dress she wore. But I saw it. I saw every wince, every self-conscious tug at her hemline, every time she angled her hand to hide her ring. That ring became a battleground later, but on that night, I only saw the first signs of resentment forming. When one of the girls said casually, "Oh my God, Tiffany, that's such a cute ring," I watched her flinch. Cute, the word people use when they don't want to say small. She forced a smile. She pretended it didn't bother her. But the second they walked away, she leaned in and whispered, "Do you ever feel like you're behind everyone else?" It wasn't a question, it was a confession she wanted me to fix. The entire evening felt like a competition. None of them admitted they were playing. They compared honeymoons, handbags, and fitness trainers. They compared apartments and private chefs and reservations at places where meals cost more than a car payment. The whole room stank of insecurity masked by money. I watched adults behave like teenagers who never outgrew the high school lunch table hierarchy. Except now, instead of gossip and outfits, the currency was wealth and status. Tiffany drank more than usual that night. Not sloppy, not out of control, but enough that her guard slipped, enough that she started making comments under her breath. Must be nice to not worry about bills. Imagine not having to pick up extra shifts. I swear I'm the only one here who actually has a job. These weren't jokes. They were envy with a punchline. Later that night, she cried in the car. Not loud tears, just quiet ones. "I just want to feel like I belong," she said. "I don't want to look like the poor friend." That was the moment I realized she didn't see her life as enough. She saw it as lacking. Not because it was lacking, but because she kept comparing it to people who lived on wealth they never earned. And comparison will rot any relationship from the inside. She didn't want reality. She wanted the image. She wanted the fantasy. And she wanted me to help her live it, even if it meant burying myself financially. Then came the ring conversation. She didn't bring it up gently. She brought it up like it was overdue. She showed me screenshots of rings that cost more than my car and said, "This is what I imagined wearing." No discussion, no empathy, no awareness that most people don't get 3-carat Tiffany diamonds unless they marry into old money. I reminded her of our budget. I reminded her that we had agreed on a modest ring so we could save for a house. She brushed that off like practicality was optional. "It's one day," she said. "I want to feel special." But I had already heard her complaining about the ring to her friends, calling it tiny and embarrassing. She didn't want a symbol of love. She wanted a symbol of status, a piece of jewelry that would silence the snide comments, a shield against the insecurity that gnawed at her every time she stood next to her wealthier friends. After the engagement party, everything shifted. Her spending increased, her comments became sharper, her resentment thickened. She started talking about weddings in a way that felt more like a red carpet event than a celebration. She wasn't trying to marry me. She was trying to outshine those women. And I became a supporting character in a show where I was expected to pay for the set design. But the climax of it all was the Miami trip, not the trip itself, The way she announced it, no discussion, no budgeting, no consideration, just an expectation that I would fork over thousands so she could party with women who looked down on me every chance they got. When I said no, she framed it as cruelty, as if denying a luxury vacation was an act of oppression, as if my refusal to go broke was the real problem, not her unrealistic expectations. But the truth? Saying no was the first healthy thing I'd done in months. If your partner compares you to wealthier friends, demands upgrades you can't afford, and expects you to pay for a lifestyle outside your budget, is it unfair to walk away, or is it the only righteous decision before you end up drowning? When Tiffany told me about the Miami trip, it wasn't a conversation, it was a proclamation. She stood in my kitchen holding a latte she couldn't afford, casually announcing that she and her friends had already picked dates, booked a resort, and mapped out every overpriced detail as if it were as simple as choosing a brunch spot. It's going to be around $3,000 per person, she said, not even blinking. But it's my bachelorette. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. She said it the way someone might say we're grabbing groceries. $3,000 for a weekend, for cocktails, hotel rooms, and Instagram stories. I asked the obvious question, who's paying for that? She didn't hesitate. You. She said it warmly, almost sweetly, as if expecting me to smile and agree, as if this was the natural order of things, her dreaming, me funding, and when I didn't respond, her expression changed. Not concern, annoyance, like I had disrupted the script she'd already rehearsed. I reminded her, calmly, that we were trying to save for a wedding, that she had bills of her own, that we had talked repeatedly about not living beyond our means. She brushed all of it aside. The other girls' fiancés are covering their costs, she said. It's normal. Normal in her circle meant financially reckless, socially expected, and entirely detached from reality. Normal in the real world meant bills, responsibility, and the ability to say no without being demonized. The argument that followed left a crack between us that never fully closed. She accused me of being controlling. She said I was restricting her happiness. She said I was making her look poor. I told her for the 100th time that appearances weren't worth drowning ourselves in debt. She didn't want the truth. She wanted permission to continue lying to herself. When she stormed out and spent 3 nights at Charlotte's, I already knew what was happening behind the scenes. That friend group never let logic interfere with their worldview. They weren't discussing budgeting or responsibility. They were hyping each other up, crafting narratives where boundaries were oppression and financial caution was unromantic. I imagined them sitting in Charlotte's living room, drinking wine purchased with someone else's credit card, plotting how to make Miami happen no matter the cost and no matter who had to pay. So when Tiffany came back and said her father offered to cover the trip, I didn't believe it. Not because I thought she was a bad person, but because I had lived with her long enough to recognize when she was telling a story to avoid confrontation. She couldn't admit she didn't have the money. She couldn't admit her friends couldn't stop themselves. She couldn't admit she felt pressure to keep up. So she invented a false safety net and hoped it would hold until the trip was over. I didn't push the issue. Not because I believed her, but because I needed to see how far the illusion would go before it broke on its own. When she left Thursday morning for Miami, she was glowing. She wore designer sunglasses she couldn't afford, posted boomerangs of mimosas at the airport bar, and bragged about her first-class seat as if she'd earned it. And the moment her plane landed, the social media parade began. Every story was curated to perfection. Yachts, cocktails, fancy dinners, shimmering pools, club outfits, expensive shopping bags from stores she never set foot in back home. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. They always do. Friday morning, she posted a cabana that costs more per day than some people earn in a week. That evening, she showed off a table at a rooftop club, complete with 2 bottles of champagne and a row of glowing sparklers. That setup alone was easily $2,000. Saturday morning, it was brunch, the kind with gold leaf pancakes and cocktails named after celebrities. Saturday afternoon, it was shopping, not window shopping. Bags, multiple bags. Bags from stores where the cheapest item is still triple her weekly paycheck. Every post felt like a performance, like she was trying to convince not just her followers, but herself that she belonged in this world, a world shaped by credit cards, family wealth, and curated illusion. But the truth always floats up eventually, and it started to show in the cracks of her midnight texts. Friday night, she sent me a picture of her at the club, drunk and glowing. Wish you were here, she wrote, but her eyes told a different story. She looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally, exhausted from pretending. Saturday afternoon, she texted me a video of the yacht rental. Her smile was big, but her laugh was brittle. Best weekend ever, she wrote. But there was something in the way she framed the photo, like she didn't want to be left out of the group shot, like she needed proof she was there, like she was terrified of slipping behind the others. Then Saturday night hit. The calls started around 2 a.m. Missed call, missed call, missed call. Then a text. Baby, please answer. Then another. It's serious. Then more frantic ones. I didn't see because my phone was off. When I answered at 3:17 IMM, her voice didn't sound like the confident woman on Instagram. It sounded like a scared kid whose lies had finally become too heavy to carry. My card declined, she said. We ran up a huge tab. Security took our IDs. They're calling the police. I need you. Please send $2,000 right now. That's when the truth surfaced. Her dad hadn't paid for anything. The resort, the shopping, the dinners, it was all on credit. Credit she didn't have, credit she couldn't repay, credit she assumed I would rescue. And when I said call your dad, it wasn't punishment. It was finally refusing to abandon myself so she could avoid reality. If someone lies about funding a luxury trip, racks up thousands in debt, then tries to pull their partner into the fallout, is refusing to bail them out heartless? Or is it the fairest line anyone could draw? By the time I turned my phone back on the next morning, the damage had already been done. Tiffany's messages told the whole story in slow motion: panic, denial, desperation, and then silence. The kind that only comes when the consequences finally arrive. The first few texts were frantic. Baby, please answer. They won't let us leave. They're serious. Then came the shift. They called the police. Please don't let this happen to me. By the time she wrote, I'm scared, she was already in custody. Nothing prepares you for the moment a police officer calls your phone and says your fiancé is in jail. Part of me felt sick. Part of me saw it coming like a storm we'd been pretending wasn't on the horizon. The officer explained everything with clinical detachment, like he'd recited the same narrative 100 times before. Tiffany and her friends weren't just unable to pay, they were belligerent. They refused to cooperate, they caused a scene, and when officers showed up to sort out the unpaid bill, Tiffany made everything worse by arguing, crying, and pulling the "my boyfriend will pay" card. Except this time, the boyfriend didn't show up. The officer asked if I was coming to bail her out. His tone told me he expected a yes. He didn't know the full story. He didn't know about the lies, the secret debt, the pressure, or the exhaustion of being turned into someone's financial safety net. He didn't know the version of Tiffany I had been living with. So I told him the truth. I'm not in Miami and I'm not paying her bail. A long pause followed, not judgment, confusion. Society often expects men to fix everything, but I wasn't her father. I wasn't her bank. I wasn't her sponsor, and I wasn't responsible for choices she made while trying to impress people who didn't care about the wreckage she left behind. The officer exhaled softly, almost like he understood more than he could say. She'll need to contact her family, he said. We'll inform her. When I hung up, I stared at the wall for a long time. Not because I doubted the decision, I didn't, but because I realized how long I had been cushioning her fall, how many times I had softened the truth, minimized her behavior, or convinced myself she would grow out of it. Maybe she could have, but not with me shielding her from consequences. The calls from her friends came next, and it was the loudest silence I'd ever experienced because none of them offered money, none of them bailed her out, none of them put their credit cards down at the club or rushed to the station. They only had demands and blame and criticism. You abandoned her, you humiliated her, you ruined her bachelorette. These were the same women who pressured her into spending money she didn't have, mocked her when she couldn't keep up, and then vanished the second it cost them anything real. Their loyalty evaporated the moment money entered the conversation. And that's when the unexpected call came. Her father. He didn't yell, he didn't accuse. His voice was tired, worn down, threaded with years of trying to manage the fallout she created. He asked why I didn't help, and I told him everything the lies, the pressure, the financial expectations, the debt. He didn't argue. He didn't defend her. He just listened. And then he told me the truth I should have known months earlier. Tiffany doesn't have a money problem, he said. She has a responsibility problem. He explained how she'd blown through her trust fund in half a year, how she treated credit cards like endless extensions of her desires, how she always expected someone else to fix what she broke. Her parents cut her off not because they were controlling, but because they were drowning. They hoped real-world consequences would force her to grow up. Instead, she found new people to shield her. Boyfriends, friends, anyone willing to play the role of rescuer. Then came the number. $40,000 of credit card debt, another 15 to 20 from Miami, a total nearing $70,000, hidden, unspoken, quietly waiting for marriage to turn it into my burden. When she dates someone stable, her father said, she shifts responsibility to them, not maliciously. It's just what she's learned to do. He paused, voice heavy. You seem like a good man, better than most, but you can't fix this for her. She has to want to fix it herself. Is the closest thing to a warning a parent can give. By the time Tiffany called me that evening from the airport, she sounded like a child whose fantasy world had finally collapsed. Her voice was small, trembling. She apologized over and over, promising she didn't mean for things to go this far. She said she'd change. She said we could fix it together. But even in her apology, she kept using the word we, like the debt was shared, like the responsibility was mutual, like the consequences belonged to both of us. That was the exact moment I realized the relationship was already over. Because when someone's mistakes become your responsibility and their consequences become your burden and their lies become your problem, that's not partnership. That's a trap. And I wasn't stepping into it. If someone hides tens of thousands in debt, lies about who's funding their lifestyle, and tries to make their partner responsible for the consequences, is ending the engagement harsh, or is it the fairest act of self-respect a person can make? Tiffany showed up at my door the next morning with the look of someone who had been dragged through reality and didn't recognize the world anymore. Her hair was unbrushed, her makeup smudged from crying, her designer outfit wrinkled like she had slept in it or tried to but couldn't. There are moments in life when a person's entire illusion collapses in front of you, and this was one of them. She stood on my porch holding a small overnight bag, the same one she used when we first started dating, back when things felt simple and unburdened. The contrast between then and now was painful. When I opened the door, she didn't speak at first. She just looked at me with these searching eyes, like she was hoping I would smile and tell her everything was going to be okay. But the truth hung between us, heavy and impossible to ignore. She stepped forward and started talking fast, too fast, like she could outrun the consequences by getting the words out before they settled. I know I messed up, she said. I know Miami was stupid. I know I lied. But you can't just give up on us over one bad weekend. People make mistakes, couples work through things. That's what love is. Her voice cracked on that last word, but even then, there was something missing. She was apologizing for the outcome, not for the behavior that led there. She was apologizing because she wanted the relationship back, not because she understood why it fell apart. She was apologizing to restore the illusion, not to confront the truth. I let her talk, let her spill every excuse, every promise, every emotional plea she had rehearsed on the flight home. She said she'd cut out the credit cards. She said she'd get help. She said she'd go to counseling. She said she'd change her spending habits. She said we could become stronger from this. All future tense, all theoretical, all centered on the idea that I should stay. And then she said the sentence that made everything crystal clear. You can't throw away our future over money. It was the final reveal of how differently we saw the world. To her, money was superficial, an inconvenience, a temporary obstacle that could be smoothed over with apologies and promises. But money is not just currency. It's stability, it's safety, it's planning, it's trust, it's honesty, it's every decision that affects not just yourself, but the person standing beside you. Money is a mirror, and hers reflected a future I couldn't walk into. I handed her a box filled with everything she'd left at my place: her makeup bag, her sweater, her hairbrush, the perfume bottle she kept on my dresser like a territorial marker. She stared at the box like she didn't understand what it was. When she finally lifted it, her hands shook. "I don't love who you've become," I told her. "The person I fell for was responsible, honest, someone who cared about building a life with me, not performing one for other people. You've been lying about money for months while hiding debt that would have become my problem after we got married. That's not a mistake, that's a pattern. And patterns don't disappear because someone gets caught." She started crying harder, the kind of crying that makes your whole body shake. But tears don't erase actions, and they don't rebuild trust. She begged for another chance, promised she understood now, insisted she would do anything to prove she could be better. But change doesn't happen in 24 hours, and trust doesn't magically restore itself between a jail cell and a doorstep. And what broke me wasn't the money. It was that she had never once chosen me over her need to impress people who didn't care whether she sank or swam. She didn't want partnership, she wanted rescue, and I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life rebuilding someone who refused to stand on her own feet. The hardest part was closing the door. She kept her foot in the way for a moment, still begging, still pleading, still insisting that this could be fixed if I would just give her one more chance to rewrite the script. But the story had already ended. I gently moved her foot, told her goodbye, and shut the door. Silence flooded the room, not emptiness, peace. The kind of peace that comes only after months of tension, deception, and constant emotional negotiation. I felt lighter, clearer, and more grounded than I had in a long time. Like I had finally stopped carrying a weight that wasn't mine to begin with. And sometimes that's exactly what letting go is, not abandoning someone, but finally refusing to abandon yourself. If a partner repeatedly lies, hides mounting debt, and tries to place the consequences of their choices onto you, is walking away cruel, or is it the only just and rational act of protecting your future? The days after the breakup were strangely quiet, almost unnervingly so. When someone as chaotic as Tiffany exits your life, the first thing you notice isn't relief. It's the absence of noise. No buzzing notifications, no guilt-laced texts, no emotional roller coasters disguised as conversations. My apartment felt clearer, my mind felt sharper, and for the first time in months, I woke up without feeling like I had to prepare for a crisis I didn't create. But the quiet never lasts, not when the person on the other end is desperate to maintain control over the narrative. Tiffany didn't contact me directly, I had blocked her, but she found other ways. Mutual friends reached out, acquaintances reached out, even people I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had something to say. Most messages started the same way. "Tiffany told us everything." That sentence always made me laugh under my breath. Tiffany never told anyone everything. She told whatever version made her the victim and framed me as the cold, unfeeling fiance who abandoned her in a crisis. What she didn't mention was that the crisis was her own doing. What she didn't say was that she lied about the trip, the money, the debt, even her parents. What she didn't include was that I had set boundaries long before Miami, boundaries she chose to ignore because she thought consequences were negotiable. But her friends weren't after the truth. They were after a villain. Charlotte called first, the same Charlotte who had hyped Tiffany into the Miami trip, who had laughed at the idea of budgeting, who had helped her fabricate the lie about her dad paying. She called me screaming, practically frothing at the mouth, blaming me for Tiffany's arrest, her embarrassment, her emotional collapse. She didn't mention the $8,000 zero cents nightclub tab. She didn't mention the maxed out credit cards. She didn't mention the fake "my dad paid for it" story. She didn't mention any of the real reasons Tiffany ended up in handcuffs. To people like her, accountability is optional as long as you can blame someone else. Then Madison called, the one with the $50,000 0 cents ring and the lifestyle curated entirely by her fiancé's income. Her tone was dripping with disgust. Do you know how humiliating it was for her? She said. A real partner would have protected her. Protected her from what? The truth? The bill? The consequences of her own decisions? Madison didn't care. In her world, men are wallets with legs. Responsibility isn't something her circle practices, it's something they outsource. But the message that really hit me came from Tiffany's roommate. She wasn't angry, she wasn't dramatic, she wasn't delusional. She was tired. I thought you should know, she said quietly. Tiffany owes closer to $70,000 total. The Miami trip maxed out her last two cards. She hasn't paid rent this month. She's been crying for days. She paused, like she wasn't sure she should continue. Her dad picked her up yesterday. She's moving back home. That's when the reality set in. The fantasy Tiffany tried so desperately to maintain had finally collapsed under its own weight. She wasn't the glamorous girl on Instagram anymore. She wasn't the socialite keeping up appearances. She wasn't the friend trying to outshine the rest. She was a woman forced to start over, not because someone abandoned her, but because she refused to listen when people tried to save her from herself. A few hours later, another message came from her roommate. He also got fired. It turned out Tiffany had missed 3 days of work after returning from Miami. No call, no explanation. And when her boss finally reached her, she gave a story so inconsistent, it raised more questions than answers. They let her go on the spot. Losing her job wasn't the Miami club's fault. It wasn't mine. It wasn't her friends. It was a culmination of years of never understanding that adult life comes with consequences you can't hide from forever. Her father called me one more time, not to blame me, to thank me. You did the right thing, he said quietly. She needed this wake-up call. He admitted Tiffany had manipulated previous boyfriends into paying off her cards, covering her expenses, even co-signing loans she never repaid. We weren't trying to punish her when we cut her off, he said. We were trying to save her, but she found ways around every lesson. Then he said something that stayed with me. If you had married her, she would have ruined you financially, not out of malice, but out of habit. And with that, the last piece clicked. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a pattern, a mindset, a lifelong cycle of denial, entitlement, and dependence. And I had stepped out just in time. While all this unfolded, something unexpected happened in my own life. I felt my energy return, my focus sharpened. I caught myself thinking about the future in a way that felt possible again. I started fixing up my apartment, started researching buying a house, started reconnecting with friends I'd unintentionally drifted away from. When you are constantly putting out someone else's fires, you forget how it feels to breathe in a room that isn't full of smoke. And that was the revelation. I didn't lose anything. I escaped something. People talk about heartbreak like it's a wound, but sometimes it's surgery. Painful, necessary, and the only thing that prevents a deeper damage you can't recover from. Tiffany's story would continue without me. Maybe she will change. Maybe she won't. Maybe she'll learn the lesson this time. Maybe she'll fall back into old patterns, but her journey is hers now, not mine. And for the first time, I could focus entirely on my own life instead of trying to save someone who wasn't ready to save herself. Freedom isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet click of a door closing and the deep breath you take afterward. When someone's chaos becomes your responsibility, their debt becomes your burden, and their lies become your reality, is walking away abandonment, or is it the only path toward a life where your stability and future finally get protected? What surprised me most in the weeks after everything collapsed wasn't the quiet in my apartment, it was the quiet inside my own head. For the first time in almost a year, my thoughts weren't crowded with worry about Tiffany's spending, her moods, her comparison traps, her impulse decisions, or the constant pressure to be someone I couldn't afford to be. The noise of managing someone else's chaos had been so constant, I hadn't realized it had swallowed my own life whole. Now that it was gone, I could actually hear myself think again. That's when the truth hit me. Area I had been living reactively, not intentionally. Surviving, not building. I started getting up earlier, started cooking in my own kitchen again instead of rushing to expensive restaurants she used to insist on. I cleaned out my car, my closet, my email inbox, places that had accumulated clutter because I'd been prioritizing someone else's life over my own. I reconnected with hobbies I hadn't touched in months, things like weekend hikes, restoring old tools in my garage, listening to audiobooks while I worked on HVAC installations, mundane things, ordinary things, but they were mine, and I had missed them more than I realized. One night, I caught myself smiling at nothing while making dinner, just standing there stirring pasta, realizing that this simple stillness had been missing for far too long. And then something else shifted. My perspective. I started looking back at the relationship not through the lens of heartbreak, but through clarity. Clarity about the warning signs I ignored, clarity about the patterns I rationalized, clarity about the way love can trick you into believing sacrifice is the same thing as partnership. There were so many moments I overlooked. The way she hid shopping bags in her trunk for days so I wouldn't ask questions. The way she dismissed budgeting as negative energy. The way she always talked about weddings, vacations, and milestones in terms of aesthetics and impressing others, never in terms of what we could realistically plan or afford. The way she treated money like a magic trick instead of a resource. The way she treated my financial caution as a flaw instead of a strength. Financial incompatibility isn't about rich versus poor. It's about values. It's about mindset. It's about responsibility and discipline and honesty. And the hardest truth I learned, someone who lies about money will lie about anything. Because financial lies aren't isolated. They reveal a deeper pattern, an unwillingness to face reality, accept limits, or take accountability. Once I understood that, the entire relationship snapped into a shape I'd been avoiding. Tiffany didn't deceive me out of spite. She deceived me because she couldn't face the version of herself that didn't fit into the world she wanted to belong to. She was performing a lifestyle she saw on Instagram, not living the one she actually had. And she expected me, financially, emotionally, mentally, to subsidize the gap. But here's the truth no one likes to say out loud. Love cannot survive inside someone else's fantasy, especially when you're paying the bills for the illusion. When her father told me she had drained her trust fund and racked up nearly $70,000, 0 cents of debt, I realized I had dodged a life-altering disaster, not a temporary setback, a lifetime of being held financially hostage. Because once you marry someone who has no respect for money, the law binds you to their mistakes. You don't just inherit their debt, you inherit their habits, their impulses, their secrets, their consequences. Walking away wasn't just a breakup. It was an act of self-preservation. Over the next month, I started focusing heavily on my career. I took extra HVAC jobs. I set aside money for a down payment on a house. I met with a financial advisor. My life started aligning with the goals I'd put on pause because all my energy had been diverted toward managing Tiffany's expectations. It wasn't until I was standing in a bank talking about mortgage pre-approvals that I had my biggest realization yet. Tiffany had been a distraction from building the life I actually wanted. Not because she was a bad person, but because she refused to build anything real with me. She chased status. I chased stability. We weren't building the same future. We weren't even standing on the same ground. She was living 6 feet above reality, and I was always expected to be the latter. And I finally stepped off the rung. Girlfriends later told me I looked calmer. My coworkers joked that I seemed lighter. My therapist, who I started seeing after everything imploded, said something that stuck with me. You stopped negotiating with chaos. And she was right. Tiffany's life operated in extremes. High highs and catastrophic lows, luxury followed by crisis, apologies followed by repeat behavior. I had been trapped in a cycle that disguised chaos as passion and dysfunction as romance. The moment I stepped out, the fog lifted and I saw myself clearly again, not as the fixer, not as the provider, not as the emotional shock absorber, but as a man capable of stability, growth, and self-respect. The biggest lesson? You don't need to rescue someone to prove you're good. Sometimes the bravest, kindest thing you can do for yourself is walk away before someone else's financial storm becomes your shipwreck. When someone's pattern of deceit and financial destruction threatens to derail your entire future, is it justice to stay and support them, or justice to finally choose yourself and walk toward the life you were meant to build? In the weeks that followed, something unexpected happened. I began to understand that what broke between Tiffany and me wasn't just trust, it was alignment. People talk about relationships like they're held together by love, but love is only the spark. What keeps two people together long term is something far less glamorous: shared values, shared priorities, shared definitions of responsibility, stability, and respect. Looking back with clearer eyes, I realized Tiffany and I never shared those things. Not really. We both wanted companionship, yes. We enjoyed affection, yes. We liked the idea of a future together, but we didn't agree on what that future looked like. To Tiffany, a life together meant status, image, celebrations, curated moments she could post online, and a lifestyle that signaled success to her friend group. To me, a life together meant security, planning, budgeting, a home with a foundation that wouldn't crumble at the first unexpected bill. I wanted admiration. I wanted peace. She wanted spectacle. I wanted stability. She wanted to be envied. I wanted us to be secure. Those differences weren't small. They were tectonic. They were the kind of differences that don't show up on the first date or during the honeymoon phase, but reveal themselves slowly, like cracks spreading through concrete. And once those cracks appear, love alone can't seal them. Financial betrayal is a unique kind of pain. It doesn't just break trust, it shatters safety. It makes you question your own judgment, your own instincts, your own ability to choose a partner, because money is interconnected with every decision you make as a couple, every plan, every hope, every stability you think you have. When Tiffany lied about her debt, she didn't just hide numbers on a screen, she hid the truth about who she was behind the scenes. Debt doesn't accumulate by accident. It's the result of habits, patterns, decisions, and blind spots. By the time someone reaches tens of thousands of dollars in hidden credit card balances, there have already been countless moments of denial, avoidance, overspending, and justification. And here's the hardest truth I had to accept. If someone lies about their financial life, they're already comfortable lying about their real life. Tiffany lied through omission, through selective truths, through stories shaped for sympathy, through narratives designed to protect her pride, not because she was evil, but because she couldn't face the version of herself that wasn't wealthy, admired, or envied. She was addicted to the fantasy of who she thought she should be, not the reality of who she actually was. Her friends didn't help. They fed the addiction. They validated every insecurity. They encouraged every reckless choice. They glamorized overconsumption. They mocked normalcy. To them, financial irresponsibility wasn't a flaw. It was a rite of passage, a badge of belonging, a standard to uphold so they could all maintain the illusion of wealth. And Tiffany desperately wanted acceptance in that group. She wanted to be seen, respected, and admired by women who couldn't even respect themselves. When you surround yourself with people who prioritize appearance over integrity, you eventually lose sight of what matters. Tiffany wasn't just trying to keep up with them, she was becoming them. I, on the other hand, had built my life on the opposite foundation. I came from a family where money was earned, not handed down, where budgets mattered, where you didn't pretend to be richer than you were, where responsibility wasn't optional, where you didn't gamble with rent money or max out credit cards for Instagram posts. My entire sense of stability came from choosing wisely, planning ahead, saving, investing, building slowly. Tiffany had lived her adult life betting that someone else would swoop in before the consequences arrived. Her father told me she had always been this way, just hidden behind the cushion of family wealth. Once the cushion was removed, she fell, and instead of learning to stand, she looked for the next cushion, the next rescuer. That role was never supposed to be mine, yet she quietly auditioned me for it from day one. The most painful part was recognizing the ways I had enabled her. Every time I paid for an expensive dinner I couldn't justify, every time I ignored a red flag, every time I tried to reason with someone who didn't want reason, I fed the cycle. I taught her unintentionally that she could push the limits and I would bend, that she could overspend and I would compensate, that she could expect more and I would stretch myself thin. But Miami was the moment the rope snapped. Not because it was the worst thing she'd ever done, but because it was the inevitable conclusion of a pattern I refused to acknowledge sooner. And that's the quiet truth no one admits. Financial betrayal doesn't start with a giant lie. It starts with tiny justifications. A little overspend here, a small lie there, a selected truth later, a missing receipt, a hidden bag, a minimized expense, a shrug when asked about budgeting, a joke about being bad with money. All of those were warning signs. All of them were clues. All of them were chances to face reality before it escalated. But love blinds you in subtle ways. It convinces you to rationalize what should alarm you. It convinces you that it will work itself out. It convinces you that caring means absorbing the impact of someone else's behavior. The lesson I learned, the one that rebuilt my entire understanding of relationships, was simple. You cannot build a stable life with someone who lives in denial, and you cannot rescue someone who refuses to rescue themselves. By the time I fully accepted that, I no longer felt heartbreak. I felt freedom, not the celebratory, triumphant kind, the quiet, grounded kind, the kind where your nervous system finally relaxes because it's no longer bracing for the next financial crisis disguised as a romantic adventure. That's when I realized something even deeper. Walking away wasn't about punishing Tiffany. It was about refusing to punish myself. When someone repeatedly lies about money, overspends, avoids responsibility, and expects you to fix everything, is staying the loving choice? Or is the real justice finally choosing a life that isn't built on someone else's denial? In the months that followed, something inside me shifted permanently. At first, it was subtle, like stepping outside after a long storm and noticing the sky looks different. But the longer I lived without the weight of Tiffany's financial chaos, the more I felt my sense of self returning. My decisions were no longer shaped around avoiding her reactions, managing her impulses, or cushioning her from reality. For the first time in a long time, my future felt like something I could actually shape instead of something that happened to me because of someone else's choices. Started taking steps I had postponed for too long. I went back to the gym, I reconnected with friends, I improved my diet, I planned out career goals instead of just riding the wave of work. On weekends, I took long drives just to think. No arguments, no pressure, no frantic emergencies popping up on my phone. My life started feeling like a steady rhythm instead of a constant, rapid heartbeat. What surprised me most wasn't how much I missed Tiffany, because I didn't. It was how much I missed myself. The version of me that used to be grounded, self assured, forward thinking. Somewhere in the relationship, I had traded those qualities for accommodation, negotiation, emotional labor, financial boundary setting, and soothing someone whose turbulence I kept mistaking for passion. That's when the truth landed fully. I didn't fall in love with Tiffany's reality. I fell in love with her potential. And potential is dangerous when it blinds you to patterns. Her potential was the version of her she claimed she wanted to become: responsible, honest, grounded, appreciative of a simple life. The version I thought would emerge once she grew out of her habits. But potential is not a promise. Potential is not behavior. Potential is fantasy. And building a relationship on fantasy is building a house on sand. The real Tiffany was the one who used money to soothe insecurity, the one who valued image over honesty, the one who believed consequences were optional, the one who used tears as currency, the one who always found the next excuse, the next lie, the next person to blame. And it took the collapse in Miami for me to finally see that potential had blinded me to the real and extremely costly truth. But once the truth became clear, everything else followed naturally. I started running numbers, not out of bitterness, but out of curiosity. If I had married her, her debt would have been my debt. Her spending habits would have drained our joint accounts. Her friends' influence would have shaped our financial priorities. Her inability to budget would have sabotaged the stability I'd spent years building. And one day, the burden of being the financial grown up would have turned into resentment so deep it would have poisoned everything. Avoiding that future wasn't just smart, it was necessary, it was survival. Relationships fall apart in small ways long before they end in big ways. The big moment, the arrest, the betrayal, the confrontation is just the explosion. The erosion happens quietly. Every time she ignored my concerns, every time she treated my practicality as a flaw, every time she demanded more than I could reasonably give, every time she made looking rich a higher priority than being responsible. Every time she lied because the truth didn't fit her narrative. And every time I absorbed it, I explained it away, I softened it until I couldn't anymore. But walking away wasn't just about ending a relationship, it was about breaking a cycle of rescuing, enabling, hoping, justifying, and losing myself in the process. When the door closed that last morning, it didn't just shut on Tiffany, it shut on the version of me who thought love meant tolerating instability. And I began pouring energy back into myself. I saved more aggressively. I studied mortgage options. Within 3 months, I got pre approved for a loan. For the first time, the idea of owning property wasn't a distant dream, it was a real step toward a real future. And that future wasn't built around managing someone else's crises, it was built around my own choices. A funny thing happens when you reclaim your life. Your standards rise, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. I started paying attention to things I ignored before, how people talk about money, how they handle stress, how they treat boundaries, how they react when you say no. Those things aren't small, they're character, they're compatibility, they're the foundation of a life that won't break under pressure. I found myself grateful, genuinely grateful that I got out when I did. Before marriage, before kids, before shared accounts, before legal entanglements, before her problems became my identity, before my entire future was tied to someone who treated security like a costume she could put on when convenient. The lesson was deep, simple, and permanent. Love doesn't require self sacrifice. Partnership doesn't require financial martyrdom. And protecting your stability isn't selfish, it's responsible. When someone repeatedly proves they cannot be trusted with money, honesty, or accountability, walking away is an abandonment. It's the moment your life finally starts moving in the right direction again. When your future, stability, and financial safety are on the line, is it more just to stay and fix someone who doesn't want to change? Or to walk away and finally build the life you actually deserve?